All right, I think we're live. Hi everyone, it's Kristen from k.becca, and in today's live stream we're going to be making this super cool foiled Halloween card. All of the supplies that I'll be using for this project are linked in the description area below. So before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about DIY hot foiling. Typically, when you hot foil something, you need a laser print of the image that you want to foil. And that's what I have here. This is a laser printer version of the design that I'm going to be using in the card. And the reason that you want a laser print is because laser printers use toner. And the toner from the laser printer melts as you run it through the foiling machine or heat laminator. And as it melts, it bonds with the foil. So every place where you have this black toner, the foil will adhere as you run it through your foiling machine. For this project, I'm going to be using something called Deco Foil Transfer Gel. And this is great because you can still do DIY hot foiling and you don't have to have a laser printer. So for me, I've had a laser printer for years. I love it. I use it all the time, but that's not the case for everyone. So if you don't have a laser printer and aren't in the market for one, something like this is a fantastic alternative and allows you to create foiled accents and patterns and stencils without actually having a laser printer. So the first thing that I did for this project is I cut the stencils. So I have this Best Witches stencil here. And I also have this dotted background that we're going to be using for the project. And my favorite material to cut any stencils out of is Duralar. And this is an acetate alternative. I really like the matte film because I just think that it allows you to see things a little bit better when you're stenciling. Because it's sort of translucent and it cuts beautifully with the silhouette cameo. And the cameo is what I used to cut all of my stencils. So I have those stencils cut out. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, I've already cut some black cardstock and some white cardstock. So the black cardstock is cut to an A2 card size, so it's 4 1/4 inches wide by 5 1/2 inches tall. And this smaller piece is cut to 3 1/2 inches wide by 4 3/4 inches tall. So it's a little bit smaller than the A2. Hey Keith, thanks for joining me. All right, so first I'm going to do the background. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the black cardstock down on my surface. And then I'm just going to line the stencil up where I want it over top of the cardstock. And I don't want this to shift around while I'm working, so I have some painter's tape here. And painter's tape is great for this because it's a low tack tape and it peels off pretty easily. So I'm going to try to hold that in place and tape as close to the edge as I can get without going over any of the parts of the stencil. So I really want to make sure that this doesn't move. So I'm going to tape it on at least 3 sides. I found that you usually don't have to tape it on all 4 sides. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I found that taping it on 3 sides usually works pretty well. Oh, and I'm working on a silicone craft mat, so that's why I'm just taping it right to my surface. And it's very easy cleanup. So after I have that taped in place, I'm going to take the transfer gel. When I open this up, this stuff is really cool because it's actually almost like a texture paste. It's pretty thick. So it's very easy to work with and it's great for stencils because it's not so runny that it's going to run under all of your shapes and everything. And that's fantastic for something like this where I don't have adhesive on the back of my stencil to hold it in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just pick up a little bit. You don't need a whole lot. I'm going to pick up a little bit on the back of my palette knife, and I'm just going to start in the top corner and just start spreading down at an angle. And I've found that if I do like back and forth as I'm spreading it around, it tends to be pushed underneath the stencil. So I'm just really going to try to keep it going in this one direction at an angle. I'm just covering all the holes. And when I need more, I'll just pick up a little bit more on the back of my palette knife. Continue. Spread that. And when you want to scrape off the excess, you can just push down a little bit harder and angle it so the edge will pick up any of that excess, and then you can use that excess to add to the rest of the stencil. I'm going to get a little bit more here. And you can see it's a creamy white color, so you can see exactly where you're putting it. And against the black cardstock, it's nice and contrasty, so you can see exactly where it's going and where it needs to go. So after I'm done, I'm just gonna scrape off, because I just want the thinnest layer of this that I can get. So I'm gonna scrape off all the excess, and after I do that, you know, honestly, you really don't use a whole lot of this stuff. So I'm gonna wipe off on my palette knife. You don't really want to leave it, because when it starts to dry, the more that it dries, the harder it is to get off of a surface. So I like to wipe my palette knife or anything else off as soon as I can. It's just easier cleanup that way. So I'm gonna, for the time being, I'm gonna put the lid back on, and then I'm going to carefully remove the painter's tape. And as I remove that tape, just want to try to hold that stencil in place, because you don't want it to slide around. Although you do have a little bit of wiggle room, because the transfer gel actually holds that stencil in place. So you can see I'm like lifting it up, but the stencil's not lifting up from the cardstock. So it's good that you have a little bit of wiggle room there. So just get like the final side. Ooh. And then I'm just going to hold on to the corner there and lift that up. And right now I'm just putting the stencil, always when I'm stenciling, I keep a Rubbermaid container with water in it for my stencils, and then I just pop them in there. So the paint or the transfer gel or whatever I happen to be using in the project doesn't start to dry on the stencil, and it's much easier to clean. So there is that, and you can see that's pretty perfect. So I'm going to set that aside to dry, and on the container for the transfer gel, it says about an hour or until it's completely dry. And what I found is it usually takes mine probably about 2 hours. 2 hours seems to be a pretty good time before it's completely dry. So you will need a little bit of lead time if you're doing a project like this. So I'm going to just set that aside. And they're a little bit got on my work surface, so before it has a chance to dry, I'm just going to get a damp paper towel and wipe that up. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to repeat this process. We're going to repeat this process for the other stencil. So again, this is the Best Witches stencil. And what I'm going to do is I have my white cardstock piece that I've already cut here. And I'm just going to sort of try to center this on the piece of cardstock here. And we're basically just going to repeat the process with this stencil. So I have my painter's tape again. And I'm just gonna tape it in place. And again, I usually just do 3 sides. I've found that that works pretty well for me. It holds it in place pretty well as I'm working. All right, so now I'm gonna just tape at the bottom here. And this stencil has bubbled up a little bit, so I'm gonna take this off right now and just sort of flatten that out, because I want to make sure that that stencil is as flat against that cardstock underneath as possible. For this project, I actually don't want to stencil this witch hat. So what I'm going to do for this top is I'm going to take a piece of the painter's tape. I'm just going to very lightly press it in place here. And this top part doesn't even have to be pressed down. This is just here so I don't accidentally put any of the gel up into the hat. So it just protects that area. So I'm going to get my transfer gel again. And again, I'm just going to get just a little bit on the back of my palette knife. And then I'm going to start spreading it over the stencil. Now this stencil is pretty delicate in a couple of places, especially in the areas where the letters get a little bit loopy. So I want to be extra careful in those places so I don't get a bunch of the transfer gel underneath that area. Just going to spread it pretty slowly, especially over the part of the E and the part of the S. And I'm sort of like smushing it down onto those areas so they'll be pressed down and they won't float around. All right. So now I'm pretty much done with that. I'll maybe scrape up just a slight bit there. And then I'm gonna just get my paper towel again, wipe off my palette knife before the transfer gel has a chance to dry. Put my lid on the transfer gel, and then again, just very carefully, I'm gonna take up this one first, and then just try to hold that stencil in place as I'm carefully removing the tape, so the stencil doesn't slide around. Okay, just one more. Okay, so I'll set that tape aside. And then I just want to, again, carefully lift off that stencil. And I missed a little bit of the W in witches, but other than that, I think I got pretty good coverage. So I'm gonna wipe off quickly the little bit that got on my surface. And then I'm going to set this aside with the background to dry. So I have a couple that I actually did earlier. They've been drying for a couple of hours. So here is the background, and you can see when it's completely dry, it's actually clear and glossy. So here, I'll get the other one back. So here's what it looks like when it still needs to dry, and then after it's dry, it's very clear and glossy. All right, so that has dried, and I also have the white piece of cardstock, and the transfer gel is dried on this. You probably can't see it as well because it's white, but it's also clear and glossy. So now is on to the fun part. We're going to do the foiling. So for foiling, some people use regular heat laminators. I use, yeah, I keep talking about my dexterity. That's how dexterous I am. I just knocked everything off the side of my desk. So I have my Heidi Swap Mink here, and this is a machine that was created. It's a lot like a heat laminator, I like how it performs better than any regular heat laminator that I tried for foiling. So I'm just going to turn it on, and then I'm going to press the gold button until I get to setting 4, and you can see that the red button blinks while it's heating up, and then after it's at temperature, it will make a little beeping sound and this will turn green. So heat setting 4 is what I like to foil most every kind of paper, cardstock, anything that I've used for foiling. Heat setting 4 works well for me. So I'm going to set that back just a little bit. And I'm going to get my pieces that have the transfer gel dried on them, and I am going to be using this very cool, this is watercolor deco foil. So typically when you get the foil, well, most kinds of foil are just a solid color. Oh, there it goes. See, it's already up to temperature. It doesn't really take that long. And I love this line of watercolor deco foils because you can see it's not just a purple. You've got like little watercolory painted areas here and there. So you have some more magenta and you have some darker purple. It gives a really, really cool effect. So deco foil, it comes in little tubes like this, and you get 5 sheets to a tube. And you can get a lot out of those 5 sheets. So I'm just gonna set this aside. And for this, you can get transfer folders for the Mink, and I do use those a lot. But for projects that involve any sort of like gluey kind of medium or anything like that, I always like to use just a piece of plain printer paper that's been folded in half. And that's what I use as my transfer folder. So first, I don't think this is large enough that I can do both of them together, so I'll have to do them separately. But that's okay. It doesn't really take too long to run them through. So I'm going to set my piece of cardstock inside, and then I'm going to cover it with the foil, the shiny side facing up, and then I'm going to fold that closed. I'm going to move this down here so you can hopefully see it go the whole way through, see the whole process. So I'm just going to stick it in this side with the open end out to me. And I'm just going to stick it in and run it through. So this is real time right here. And again, it doesn't really take long, especially because I'm not using one of the large transfer folders, because this is just a card making project. So the cardstock that I'm dealing with is a lot smaller. So it's very easy to just use a folded piece of regular printer paper as your transfer folder. Okay, so here it is coming out the other side. All right, so open this up. And there are just slight bits of stickiness, possibly because that transfer gel hasn't completely dried, but it's nothing to worry about. I mean, it pulled out very easily. So now the magic. So here we go, we're gonna peel this off, and look at how awesome that looks. I just love that. You know, honestly, purple is not normally one of my favorite colors, but I love this watercolory look, and then it has magentas and different shades, and it really just looks great. So there we go. You can see how well it foiled. So next, I'm just going to quickly do the other piece. And I have a piece of foil that's cut to a little bit larger than the best witches. I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm just going to stick it in with the open end facing out toward me, and then I'm going to run it through. And again, it really doesn't take long, maybe just like a minute or two. And here it's already starting to come out the other end here. All right, so that's it. I never get tired of doing like the foil reveal. It's always so cool. All right, so here we go. And you can see in this area, I got a little bit of the gel in places where I didn't necessarily want it. And there is a trick that I figured out to sort of covering up these areas, at least if you're using white cardstock. So what you can do is, I have this white gel pen here. I'm just going to get that out. I'm just going to color in any of the areas. You know, some of that foil is actually gonna lift off like that. That part was loose, so I could get it off there. But this S gets pretty complex in here, so I'm just gonna take the white gel pen and then just wipe off any excess. And there are still little tiny bits of foil that are a little bit loose, but I found that the gel pen just really helps you clean things up around those little itty bitty edges that sometimes a little bit of the extra gel might get into, and no one's going to be able to tell when they look at the card. So it cleans up really nicely. All right, so now I have, clean off these little bits of foil. So now I have my background, and I have the part with the sentiment. And so the final thing that we're going to do is the witch's hat that's going to go up in this area of the card. So for that, I've actually cut another piece of black cardstock. This is the same black cardstock that I used for the background of the card. And I want the little band on the witch hat to actually be foiled as well, so it sort of ties everything together. And for that, I'm going to use, this is another Deco Foil product. This is their peel and stick toner sheets. So at the beginning of the video, I explained that typically when you do DIY hot foiling, you're going to use a laser printer because laser printers use toner, and the toner melts as it goes through a laminator or foiling machine, and that is what the foil bonds to. So Deco Foil and Mink, actually, who makes the Heidi Swap Mink, they sell these toner sheets, and I think these are probably my favorite, these Deco Foil peel and stick. And what's awesome about these is that you can die cut them, you can punch them with paper punches, you can make so many different shapes, and then they have adhesive already on the back, so you don't have to worry about gluing them or anything like that. So I guess I don't need to get this out of the package because I have a little piece that's been cut here. And so they're completely covered with toner, and you can just put your little foil, you know, should I run this through? I think I'll run this through too so you can see it. Get my Mink back out here. Let me move the card out of the way. Just do this. So I'm gonna get my little printer paper again, and I'll just put that in there again with the foil color side up, and I'll just run that through real quick so you can see. I know, Keith, iridescence just really does make, it like takes things to the next cool level. Iridescent, holographic, I am all about it. And I just really do love this watercolor Deco Foil just because it has those variations in color, which makes things pop and even more interesting. All right, so this is just about done here. All right, so you can see when I peel this off that the toner sheet is now completely covered in the foil, and look at how cool that looks. And again, it's adhesive backed, so you can actually use this in a die cutting machine. You can use a paper punch, you can cut it by hand, you could do lots of different things with it. What I've done is I've actually, here, I'm gonna move my Mink out of the way so I can show you. that back here. What I have done is I've just cut that little band on the witch hat from a foiled piece of that peel and stick. And it's fantastic because this is such a little piece. It might be a little fussy if you just wanted to add glue to the back. And that's what makes the peel and stick great, because it already has that adhesive on the back. So all I need to do is just peel off that little backer paper there, and then get my black cardstock hat piece and just line that up and press it in place like this. Right, so I want to add this hat to the front of the card here, and I'm going to do that by just getting out my Tombow Monomalty glue. And I'm just going to dot glue around the back of the hat, making sure to get around near all the edges. And then I'm just going to line that hat up, try to center it over the best witches, and then just press it in place. And there, I'm done. I'm pretty much done with the card front now. And while I'm thinking of it, I'm just going to turn my Mink off, because it does have a little bit of a sound, so I don't know how disruptive that is. Right, so to finish the card, I have cut a card base. This is a standard A2 size card base. So it is 1/2 of a standard 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock. And then I just folded it in the center, and this is going to be a top folding card. So I'm going to just set that like that, and then I'm going to get a double-sided adhesive runner and turn this black background over. I'm just going to add a bunch of this adhesive to the back so it'll adhere in place really well. And then I'm going to line it up right over top of that card base. And then the last thing that I'm going to do to finish off the card is I'm going to take this Best Witches piece and also add adhesive to the back of this piece. To finish the card, I thought it would be interesting to just sort of angle this piece to give it a little bit more of a dynamic feel. I'm just going to line this up, sort of center it vertically and horizontally as much as I can, but it's okay if you don't get it perfect. And then I'm just going to press it down in place like this. And that finishes the card. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed this project, and also the Deco Foil Transfer Gel and the Deco Foil watercolor, which I think that watercolor foil is pretty darn cool, and you can see all the gradation. I hope you can see at least a little bit on camera, all of the cool different purples and magentas that you get in this particular foil. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching, and be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to receive notifications about any future videos. I'll be back next week with more Halloween craft fun.